Janavalabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vacha Chandarandana Yamunatera Vanachari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayo Radha Giri Radhe Radha Giri Radhe Shri Radhe Radha Prabhupada, 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 Jai Prabhupada, Jayo, Jaya Gurudev, Gurudev, Jaya Nitai Gaur Haribo, Haribo, Nitai Gaur Haribo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, The Descendants of Dhruva Maharaj, chapter 13, text number 12. Svavatir Vatsaraslishtha Bharya Santasanatmajam Pushpanam Hidmaketumcha Isham Ujam Vasam Swarvati Vatsarasisham Ayas Sada Pushpanam Tikmakitum Cha Isham Vasunjayam Swarvati Vatsarasisham Ayas Sada Pushpanam Tikmakitum Cha Isham Vasam Ashri Parvati Vatsarasesha Varasudraksara Ishavarjam Parvati Vatsarasesha Ishavarjam Vasundayam Parvati Vatsarasya of King Vatsara Ishta very dear Bharya wife Asuta gave birth to Shat 6 Atmachan sons Pushparna Tigmaketu Cha also Isham Isha Orja Vasam Vasu Jayam Jaya. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. King Vatsara had a very dear wife whose name was Swarti, and she gave birth to 6 sons named Pushparna, Tigmaketu, Isha, Orja, Vasu, and Jaya. Purport. Vatsara's wife is mentioned here as Ishta, which means worshipable. In other words, it appears that Vatsara's wife had all good qualities. For example, she was always very faithful and obedient and affectionate to her husband. She had all good qualities for managing household affairs. And both the husband and wife If both the husband and wife are endowed with good qualities and live peacefully, then nice children take birth, and thus the whole family is happy and prosperous. Om Ganatimanandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmanitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. King Vatsara had a very dear wife whose name was Svarvati, and she gave birth to 6 sons named Pushparna, Vigmaketu, Isha, Urja, Vasu, and Jaya. So I was reading this verse in translation last night, and what came to mind immediately was this prayer that we offer before reciting Bhagavatam, or many times we may offer it, Om Gena Timanandasya Gena Niranachalapa Chakshurum Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha. That the spiritual master, he is opening the eyes of the disciple, whose eyes have been forced shut. So it's the job of the spiritual master to open our eyes so that we can see things properly. Because living in the material world and conditioned life, then we have so many ideas, so many misconceptions that block us from seeing things properly. And the unfortunate thing is that when we have those misconceptions about life, when we hear the truth, then we're not able to accept it, or often we may not be able to accept it straight away. So it's the job of the spiritual master who is so kindly giving us an opportunity to engage in devotional service so that we can understand things spiritually, but even materially. What is a real human civilization? And what is the spiritual world? So when I was reading this, I was thinking that this could be taken as a controversial purport by Srila Prabhupada for the non-devotee, for someone who wants to just pick up this book and think, what is this? That a woman becomes worshipable if she's obedient to her husband. Seems a bit, one might think, well, this just seems, one could easily jump to the conclusion in the modern day that we live in that this is just a sexist perspective. So then we, by engaging in devotional service, by hearing and chanting in the association of devotees, following the instructions of the spiritual master, then we get a deeper perspective on who Srila Prabhupada is, who a devotee is, and how they're actually helping everyone to become closer to Krishna, even though their statements may at times appear controversial or contradictory. But actually a Vaishnava is always looking for the good fortune of everyone. So how is that this statement that Srila Prabhupada is making, this explanation, how a woman becomes worshipable by being faithful, obedient, and affectionate to her husband? Actually, this statement is based on Shastra. So it's everything that Srila Prabhupada speaks. The more we read Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada's books, the more that we see that actually all of his purports are just Shastra repackaged and represented in a way that's relevant for us to hear. So it's not that he's just come up with this statement because that's the way that he feels. Just like a conditioned soul may come up with a statement or interpretation of something based on how they feel. But it's based upon the Shastra. So when I read this section, it reminded me of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 7th canto. There you read about Narada Muni speaking to Yudhisthira Maharaj. And he explains Varnashram Dharma. From the beginning, he talks about the different social classes. And there he gives symptoms of what is symptomatic of being a Brahmana, what is symptomatic of being a Kshatriya, what is symptomatic of being a Vaishya, Shudra, and what are the symptoms of a chaste woman. So there it's explained the characteristics or the symptoms of what it actually means to be a chaste woman. So it's a very interesting part of Srimad Bhagavatam to read, but what's also very interesting is why this whole topic comes up. Basically, the whole of the 7th canto, you can trace back to the very first question that's given in the first part of the chapter. Parikshit Maharaj, he's talking with Shukadeva Goswami and he's wanting to know, why is it that the Lord appears to have taken the side of Indra? We hear that Krishna is equal to everyone, that he has no friend or an enemy, but it appears that he's taken the side of Indra. So what's going on here? He seems to be partial towards the demigods, and he seems to be inimical towards the demons. So Shukadeva Goswami in that first chapter of the 7th canto nicely explains how actually everyone is, not just the demigods, not just Indra and the demons, but everyone is getting what they deserve according to how they situate themselves in the modes of nature. So it appears as though Krishna is favoring one person, and it appears as though Krishna is not favoring another. Based on our vision, as we look out in the world, one is poor, one is rich, one is beautiful, one is ugly, one is this, one is that. So many different material designations, and we think one is good and one is bad. But actually, and that one is being favored by God and one is not being favored by God. But this is explained very nicely that actually it's just a living entity interacting with the modes of nature, and he's getting exactly what he deserves. So then Shukadeva Goswami, he goes on to explain that actually this question came up in the Rajasuya Yagya with Narada Muni and Yudhisthira. So we hear in Krishna book how in Rajasuya Yagya, then Maharaj Yudhisthira, he was supposed to be made the emperor of the world. So his brothers traveled throughout the world conquering all the different parts. And they came back and they all wanted to establish Maharaj Yudhisthira as the emperor of the world by performing this Raja sacrifice. So there was a point in the sacrifice where they had to choose who was the most worshipable personality. So as we know, then it was suggested that Krishna was the most worshipable personality and that he should be worshipped first. So almost everyone was in agreement with this, and it's quite significant because it's basically all the important personalities within the universe are there. Brahma is there, Shiva is there, all of the great sages, and here they're choosing Krishna. So as we know, the person who had a big problem with this was Shishupala. He was envious of Krishna since birth, and he began to blaspheme Krishna in front of all of the Vaishnavas, in front of all of the great personalities who didn't want to hear it. So naturally they wanted to fight with Shishupala. And Yudhisthira was in anxiety thinking if there's a fight right now, then it's going to contaminate the whole yagya and things are going to be spoiled. So Krishna, as we know, he took out his Sudarshan disc and cut off the head of Shishupala in a very expert way so that no blood was spilt in the arena. And at this point, then it's described how the Atma within Shishupala in front of everyone merged into the body of Krishna. And so Yudhisthira Maharaj was astonished, thinking, what is this? Shishupala is just, his whole life, he's just been blaspheming Krishna. But here you are giving him liberation. You've allowed him to enter into your body. What is going on here? So it doesn't make any sense. Why would you show such favor to such a personality who has only ever actually offended you? So he goes to Narada Muni to try to figure out the answer to this question. So Narada Muni explains that actually the Lord is so merciful that whoever meditates upon him whoever's mind is absorbed in him, yam yam bhavi smaram bhavam, that whatever bhava, whatever nature one remembers at the time of death, then he attains that nature. So just as Kamsa was always absorbed in Krishna through fear, then similarly Shishupal was always absorbed in Krishna out of anger, frustration. So while quitting his body, he was completely absorbed in Krishna. So therefore he attained this liberation. But then he goes on to explain how, and from another perspective, actually Shishupal, he's not an ordinary person. He was previously, him and his brother were previously Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and previous to that, then Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. So then this whole dialogue takes place, the story of Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu. So usually when we hear this story about Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad Maharaj, and Lord Nrsingadev, then we think of how the Lord comes to protect his devotee. We think about the glories of Prahlad, the young boy. We may think of so many different things when we hear this pastime, but if you hear this pastime in context of the question that's being asked by Parikshit Maharaj to Shukadeva Goswami about the partiality or impartiality of the Lord, then it kind of puts a whole other spin on the pastime, because this pastime illustrates so nicely the partial nature of the non-devotee or the conditioned soul, and the impartial nature of not only the Lord, but also his devotee, Prahlad Maharaj. So we see that Hiranyakashipu, when he was first with his son, he was very affectionate towards him. He saw him as he would cry actually, holding him in his lap. He would look upon him so nicely, thinking, oh, my son, with such affection. But when he asked his son, what is the greatest thing you've learned in school? And his son replied, Tat sarumanye suryavari dehinam sada samudvigna dhyam satrahat. And he explained to his father that anyone, he said, oh, Asuryavari, best of the demons, anyone who has accepted this material body as being permanent, then he is sure to be in anxiety. So he advised him that you should give up this mentality of thinking that you're the body and the mind, because all it is a source of anxiety. And you should go to the forest. Better than the forest is to go to Vrindavan and worship Krishna. Worship Krishna. So naturally his father was not very impressed hearing this, because Vishnu was his greatest enemy, having killed Hiranyaksha. So he wasn't immediately angry at Prahlad, but rather he was angry at Lord Vishnu and angry at the devotees of Lord Vishnu for having come and corrupted his son. So he told the school teachers, Chandra and Amaka, go and find where this boy has learned from, make sure these Vaishnavas don't enter the school again and corrupt my son. So then Chandra and Amaka, they tried very hard to teach Prahlad Maharaj about politics, about economic development, all worldly things. And of course, Prahlad Maharaj wasn't interested. So then later on, when his father again brought him before him, and he asked him again, what is the greatest thing? What have you learnt, my dear son? And his son, Prahlad Maharaj, replied, Matirna Krishna Paratas Vatova. Ito Vipadyeta Grihavatanam Adanta Gobir Vishatam Tamishram Puna Punashchar Vicharadana. So he explained to his father that actually materialistic people, their interest toward Krishna, towards spiritual life, is never aroused neither by their own endeavors nor by the instructions of others. And then he goes on to explain how blind men, they're led by other blind men, and the only way to actually get free from this is to take the dust of a Vaishnava on one's head. In other words, to serve a Vaishnava. So he was telling his father again that actually you have to get out of the situation of being entangled in the material world, which is full of anxiety. And the only way you can do that is by surrendering to a Vaishnava. Of course, again, Hiranyakashipu was extremely angry at this point. So then his anger was no longer toward Vishnu and the devotees, but it was toward his teachers, the teachers of Prahlad, Chandra and Nabha. And he was thinking, what have you done, you rascals? You've polluted my son. And they explained that no, we tried our best, but actually your son, he's developed spontaneous devotion for Krishna. We tried our best to influence him otherwise, but he's too far gone. So at this point, Hiranyakashipu's anger is then directed toward Prahlad Maharaj. He picks him up, throws him on the ground, and orders that he's killed. So you see this gradual evolution of anger and frustration. First of all, it's pointed towards the Vaishnavas and Vishnu, and then it's pointed towards the teachers, and finally towards his own son, to the extent that he wants to kill him. So this is the nature of the conditioned soul, is that when someone doesn't agree with our plans in this world, someone's not willing to cooperate and they get in the way, then they become our enemy. And those persons who were previously our friends, who helped to cooperate with us, when they no longer help to facilitate our enjoyment in this world, then they become our enemies. So this is what it means to be partial. That we see one thing is we see this person as being my friend, they assist me in getting what I want. And we see this person as an enemy because they are impeding me from getting me what I want. So this nature is so nicely shown by Hiranyakashipu, to the extent that he was even willing to kill his own son, tried to kill his own son in many ways. So then the opposite end of the scale, then Prahlad Maharaj, after Hiranyakashipu was killed by Lord Nrsingadev, then Lord Nrsingadev offers him a benediction. And Prahlad Maharaj, in conclusion, he asks his father that actually, he asks Lord Nrsingadev, I just wish the best for my father, who showed affection towards me. So it's kind of you would think, an unusual prayer to make after someone who's tried to kill you in so many different ways. But Prahlad Maharaj is showing the consciousness of the topmost devotee, that actually they're always just looking for the benefit and welfare of all living entities. But that benefit and welfare is on the spiritual platform, not on the material platform. So it may be perceived sometimes that when a saintly person or a topmost devotee does something, it appears to be not beneficial, but actually they have the intention of the spirit soul in mind, not the intention of the body or the mind. So after hearing this, because Nrsingadev then he says to Prahlad Maharaj that yes, by devotional service, then my devotee, he no longer cares for higher and lower things in this world. He no longer discriminates between higher and lower living entities, because he's completely free from jealousy and envy. So because a devotee, topmost devotee, is free from jealousy and envy, then there's no need to see someone as inferior or someone as superior, because we only see these things as inferior or superior, or persons as inferior and superior, because we have a lack. Materialistic persons are not satisfied, so they become jealous. Oh, this person has a better car, this person has a better partner, this person has more than I do, and I'm not satisfied, so therefore I become envious or jealous, and I want to minimize them so that I can then put myself up. But a devotee on the highest platform, they're satisfied just by hearing and chanting about Krishna. So they have no need to try to bring someone else down in order to elevate themselves. They're fully satisfied. So this is natural because, as we hear, we're a part and parcel of Krishna. And Krishna is the supremely satisfied person. He doesn't need to go anywhere for anything. So naturally, when a devotee realizes his nature as the loving servant of Krishna, then he shares in the qualities of Krishna. He shares in that self-satisfaction. So there's no need for him to aspire for so many unnecessary things, or to be envious or jealous towards others. So this nature is shown so nicely in this pastime, what it means to be partial. The example of Hiranyakashipu, this is my friend. And then how to be impartial by the example of Prahlad Maharaj. And also Nrsingadev, who's simply killing Hiranyakashipu for Hiranyakashipu's benefit and saving Prahlad for his benefit. And the whole pastime is for our benefit. So everything the Lord does and everything the Lord's devotees do is simply for our benefit. But we need the spiritual master in devotional service to purify and open our eyes, which have been forced shut, to actually see this. So Narada Muni, when he hears this, he's thinking, wow, this is amazing. I want to know, what is it, how to become a Vaishnava? What do you do to become how do we become devotees? How do we get to this platform? So then Narada Muni replies by giving this information about Varnashram system. And in that section, then we find the qualities of a chaste woman amongst the qualities of a Brahmana and Vaishnava, Vaishya, Shudra, Kshatriya. So it's important to understand that when Srila Prabhupada is making such statements that we hear in the purport today, although for us it may not be so controversial, perhaps it is, perhaps it's not, but it would be, I've heard it myself that sometimes people have problems with, newcomers have problems with Srila Prabhupada's books for many reasons, not just because there may be a statement that appears to them to be sexist, but it could be a statement that appears to be unscientific, or it could be against evolution, or against Darwinism, or against so many mental concoctions that people have. So then they think that Srila Prabhupada is the bad person, that actually he's just like some other ordinary person who's just saying these things because he's jealous or because he's partial. But no, the Lord's devotee is not partial. He's impartial to all, in the sense that he's willing to give everyone an opportunity to perform devotional service. So the problem comes because we have this tendency described in Sanskrit. There's this, what we call a sutra, perhaps. Yes, Satnavan Manyote Jagat. That we see the world according to how we see the world, and we think that others see the world in the same way. So because I have a tendency to be jealous from time to time, because I have a tendency to be envious or lusty or whatever it may be, then we think that everyone else must also have this tendency. So we read this statement and we think, oh, he must just be against the opposite gender, or he must just be against scientists, or he must just be against the fact that his country didn't go to the moon first. That must be why he doesn't believe in why they went to the moon. So one can come up with all these statements, all these ideas, but actually as we read and hear Srimad Bhagavatam, then we'll see that actually these persons, such as Srila Prabhupada, they're completely free from any desire to want to cheat people in this way. But actually they only have our benefit at heart. I was thinking that it's understandable that people would think this way, because the world that we live in today is a very confusing situation. If one was to hear that they have to be obedient to their husband, and that's what makes them a worshipable personality, I think, well, why should I be obedient? For myself, when I grew up in the South Island in Dunedin, then as a kid, I would notice, actually, I remember very strongly thinking that a lot of my friends, their fathers, they were of very bad character. I remember as a kid thinking that, because you sort of have, as a kid, I guess you have some purity to some degree, because you're not influenced so heavily by hormones and everything that comes along with it, so you can sort of get quite an innocent perspective of the world. So I remember thinking, like, with a few of my friends, why are their parents even together? How does she put up with him? Because he would come home. I grew up in kind of like a farming town in Dunedin, outside of Dunedin, the South Island, and all of the men, a lot of them were tradies, and they'd come home, turn on the television, watch the rugby, drink 2 or 3, 4 beers, expect to have dinner cooked for them, and then it's no secret, everyone knows, expect sense gratification in the evening after that. So one would think, why should I be obedient to such a person? They've got no good qualities. They have no ability to control their mind and senses. So I can completely understand and appreciate why one would think this. Why should I be obedient to such a person? So therefore, we all have to become qualified persons. The men have to become qualified men, and the women have to become qualified women. Not to say that you're all not qualified men and women, but just talking in general for the general population. Then these things would actually make sense if men were actually qualified, if they actually had mind sense control, and they had proper character. Then this whole philosophy would make a lot more sense. But because we don't have that, then it appears to be quite strange, actually. So according to what body we have, according to what mind we have, according to what our situation is, what our ashram is, then we all have a particular way that we're supposed to act. It's not just that women have to act a particular way, but men have to act a particular way. A brahmachari has to act a particular way. A grihastha has to act a particular way. Sannyasi and a vanaprastha, they all have to act in a specific way. And that's an austerity, because the tendency of us in this material world is that we want to act however we want, whenever we want. But Shastra regulates our activities so that we can become purified. So there's a way for every individual to act for their own purification. So Rishabdev famously explains to his sons, Nayam deho deham bhajanya loke kashtam karman alate vidbhujanya tapo divyam potrakayena satnam shibhyakas panantam. My dear boys, for one who has accepted the body in this material world, and for one who has accepted the human form, he should not waste his time like cats and dogs, simply endeavoring for sense gratification. But rather he should take to devotion of service and purify his heart. And by such activity, then he will be able to actually relish transcendental happiness. So we shouldn't just act whimsically, act however we think we should act according to modern culture. Because then it makes us no better than a cat or a dog if we act like that. But if we act according to Shastra, according to guidance of spiritual master, according to the situation that we're in, the body that we're in, the mind that we're in, the ashram that we're in, then our whole existence becomes purified, our heart becomes cleansed of who we think we are, which is actually causing the problem. And then we can relish Brahmasokya, transcendental happiness. So the good thing is that Srimad Bhagavatam that gives us examples of different personalities according to what ashram we're in, according to what body we're in, that we can take inspiration from. Not just Srimad Bhagavatam, but all the Vedas. Recently I was listening to some lectures on Mahabharata, and you see in there so many wonderful examples of chaste Vaishnavis and how powerful they become by that. The example that's often given is of Draupadi, how she was brought into the assembly of the Kurus because Maharaj Yudhisthira had lost his gambling match to Shakuni, who was a professional dice player who'd been playing since a young boy. So naturally he had defeated Yudhisthira in this game of dice to the extent that Yudhisthira had to give up practically everything. And the only way that he could get it back was by gambling Draupadi. And again he lost, so Draupadi was called into this assembly. And we hear how how Dushasana, the brother of Duryodhana, tried to disrobe her. Fortunately, a few days earlier or sometime earlier, Draupadi had been serving Krishna, and Krishna had a bowl of fruit with a knife in front of him, and he was cutting up the fruit, and he accidentally slipped and cut his finger. So Draupadi immediately, without hesitation, ripped a fine piece of silk off her sari and gave it to him, tied up his finger. And Krishna very thankfully says, just as you have given me your cloth now in this time of need, then when you're in need of cloth, I will also give cloth to you. So then in this assembly, no matter how hard Dushasana tried to take the cloth from Draupadi, he couldn't do so because Krishna was supplying unlimited cloth for it. So after seeing this, then Vidura spoke to Dhritarashtra, who was sitting there watching the whole, was hearing the whole thing unfold because he's blind. And Vidura said to him, because of this offense against this chaste woman, who is actually not only the most chaste woman, but she's the wife of the emperor of the entire planet Earth, then the destruction of your dynasty will now come. This is the point which has caused the destruction of your dynasty. It's already happened, basically. It's based on Vidura, he quotes, there's a law in Manu Samhita that if a chaste woman is insulted, then their whole dynasty is destroyed. So of course, it's all part of a big plan. There was many things that happened, but this is the point in which the whole destruction of the Kuru dynasty is based upon this offense against Draupadi. Similarly, there's Gandhari, who was so chaste that when she heard she was going to be married to a blind man, then she herself bound her eyes so that she wouldn't be considered in any way superior to him. So we know that by that she developed extraordinary mystic power and was able to protect her son to some degree, Duryodhana, by giving him a body as strong as iron. So in other words, by austerity, then one becomes powerful. We all have our own austerity that we have to perform in order to please Krishna. So by performing austerity, then one gathers or gains power, and that power should be used for serving Krishna. So I think I'll stop there and ask if there's any comments or questions or any corrections if I've said anything. It's not quite right. Jai Srila Prabhu, would you like to mention anything? Thank you. We had a small meeting with Salvina Devamrita Swami. Just the other day we had a small meeting with him, and I asked a similar question because he was speaking about how one of the benefits of the ashram is that you get to hear and then try to apply what you hear. So I said to him, well, how did we hear about, the advanced devotees in Bhagavatam, and we hear about their state of consciousness? But it seems really difficult to apply it when they're put into a similar circumstance. And he said, yes, but just to know what the standard is, then that's a great achievement. So I took that as some encouragement because, I hear all these things, but as you're saying, I go out the door and I'm going to discriminate between this, that, and the next thing. But at least if we know what the standard is, then we can see how, in which direction we need to make progress. So that's what I've heard. Thanks for anything else? Yes, Maria. Mm. I had an experience recently where, for me, it was quite tangible that I think I had done something to please my spiritual master or Krishna. Although at the time, while I was doing what I was doing, it didn't feel like that. It reminds me of I brought this topic up one time with Ramdas Prabhu in Wellington. He was explaining to me how he used to go on Sankirtan and he would practically do nothing. And as a brahmachari, and Bhagavad was with him in Christchurch, and he was doing so much, always bringing new devotees to the temple and distributing so many books. And Ramdas felt like he was doing practically nothing. And but he kept going, he kept trying, and then one day he was just in Mangalarti, leading Mangalarti, and then his whole experience of Mangalarti completely changed. He saw exactly what was going on, and basically he had a whole, I won't go into the detail because it's probably to some degree a personal thing, so I don't want to. But the point being is that if we think that Krishna has to reciprocate in a certain way with us for us to be satisfied, then we actually limit Krishna's ability to reciprocate with us. But if we're, because Rupa Goswami mentions that we need enthusiasm and patience and determination. So if we have that patience, then we'll see how actually Krishna can make us satisfied in a way that we won't necessarily expect him. So we may not be able to distribute, 50 stacks of books or Bhagavatams in a day. And we may think that that's what will satisfy us. But if we put the endeavor in, even though we don't get that particular result, well, Krishna will just reciprocate with us in a way that we weren't expecting. So it seems, from my limited experience, that it takes patience, determination, and enthusiasm to get to the point of realizing that actually Krishna, I remember Hariman Krishna Prabhu, he said to me a couple of times that Krishna knows how to pull your heartstrings because he knows better than we know what it is that will make us happy. So we have an idea that, yes, for me to be happy, I have to get this result, this circumstance. The person has to appreciate me in this way and do this and do that. But actually all that stuff, all that external stuff won't actually make us happy. It just makes us more agitated. So Krishna will arrange in such a way that we experience this reciprocation in a way that's actually satisfying for us. And that's to see the spiritual master smile and to see Krishna smile, that they're happy with what we're doing. So maybe someone else, do we have something? Is that okay? You don't want to add anything? how to develop the mood that Prahlad Maharaj had towards his father, because his father was, to say the least, offensive towards him. Well, yeah, we have to see that we weren't much better before we started practicing Krishna consciousness. So people may act in a certain way towards us, but we know that it's just based upon the material modes of nature. People are acting according to the modes that they're influenced by. It's not who they really are. Who they really are is, everyone is actually a servant of Krishna, but temporarily we appear to be something else. So the more we understand that we are spirit soul and that other people are spirit soul, then we can overcome that. So Krishna explains Tesham Sapna. So he explains that we should approach a spiritual master, inquire from them, render service to them. And then in the next verse he explains that if one does this, then the result will be that they'll see everyone in me. And or in other words, that everyone is mine. So by following the instructions of the spiritual master, then one gradually begins to realize that actually everyone is a part of Krishna. So in one sense, we just have to follow the process.
Yeah, I wanted to ask,
Esteemed means like you feel low self-esteem, and that if you like so for example, if you see someone doing better than you, then you may feel that's been a constant struggle for me. But what I've heard is that we just have to appreciate and serve those Vaishnavas who are doing better than we are. And naturally, when we appreciate devotees, then it just makes everything so much. It's like immediately all the stuff on the mind just disappears. Everyone has that experience when they give appreciation to another Vaishnava when they've done something nice. Then immediately you feel satisfied, you feel blissful. And by appreciating and serving those devotees who are more advanced than us, even just in terms of their abilities that we may want to acquire, then when they're pleased with us by our appreciation towards them, then quite mystical, I'm not exactly sure how, but their abilities are also transferred to us. So we take their qualities. From what I understand, it's because we take their association by appreciating them, that rubs off on us. Is that? I hope I didn't misunderstand the question. Maybe someone wants to add anything else? A couple minutes left. Thank you for your attention. Grantha Shri Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Hari Bol.